I didn't believe red light at that point would do anything on the body without a drug. Drug activated, no problem. Light only, forget it. So, anyways, 2 months after I built this light, something needed to be fixed on it or whatever. I can't remember now. And I got it back and I made a little tweak so I could bring it back to him. And wouldn't that happen at that time? So every 2 years, 1 to 2 years, I'd have these extreme muscle spasms. And, at that very moment, I was dealing with one of these muscle spasms just when I got that other equipment back. So I thought, what the heck? Why not put the light in the back of my chair? I could barely get into my chair. The pain level that I was experiencing was probably about an 8 out of 10, where 8 was just screaming at me, but I had to keep working. So I had to work on my computer, CAD work or whatever I was doing at the time. So I put the light behind my back and it was, and then about 20 minutes later, I get up and I stand up and I'm like almost can bend over, and my pain had dropped from maybe an 8 down to a 3 in 20 minutes.
Hey, this is Ari. Welcome to the Energy Blueprint podcast. In this episode, I'm speaking with Tom Kerber, who is the founder of a company called Sun Power LED, which makes a number of really interesting devices for photobiomodulation for red and near-infrared light therapy. And I saw a presentation that Tom gave at the London conference that happened recently for photobiomodulation. That's another term for how light affects biology and generally is hugely overlapping with red and near-infrared light therapy, though is technically more expansive than that. So there was a big conference in London recently, and Tom, who I'd never heard of before, did a presentation there that was uniquely exciting for me. And the reason why is that he, with his extensive background, not only in the engineering side of devices, but also for testing these types of devices, he utilized that knowledge to basically do a series of, a long-running, I think, series of experiments on the penetration depth of different types of devices, lasers, LED devices, different wavelengths, red, near-infrared wavelengths. And this is a hugely important area in the overall field of photobiomodulation because there's a whole sort of mess of unknowns and very contentious stuff that many people have different perspectives on. And the real problem with it is that we just don't have really good data on penetration depth of different types of light, different irradiances or intensity, sort of power output of the light. There's other factors that go into this as well, as far as beam angle and the degree to which the light is collimated, like in the context of lasers versus LEDs. The way that different light beams can potentially overlap with one another, the degree to which different wavelengths of light penetrate the tissue to different depths. There's really all of these sort of question marks that just looking at the body of evidence, we don't really have great answers to. And without sophisticated testing equipment, it's really hard to do these, to sort of get definitive answers. I've done a lot of at-home testing myself with different devices and looking how much light I can see visibly will shine through my fingers or shine through my whole hand. For example, go into a dark closet with different devices and play around to experiment with different red light devices to see how much light penetrates. Even that is very limited in what you can assess because near-infrared wavelengths are actually invisible to the human eye. So the type of wavelengths that actually penetrate through human tissue the most are the ones that we can't even perceive with our visual system. So basically, everything that I've done on my own is, I don't want to say worthless, but very limited from a scientific perspective. And I've really been waiting for someone to come along who has done a lot of these in-depth penetration experiments, putting different types of devices, different wavelengths to the test and saying definitively in a scientific way, here's what we know about the penetration depth of this or that. And Tom seems to have done the most extensive testing in that regard of anybody that I'm aware of, including studies in the actual formal literature. It's very limited in that regard. So I was very impressed with his work and had a wonderful call with him. Started talking with him about a lot of his findings, which I found interesting, and basically invited him on the podcast to share a lot of his work and his experimentation with all of you guys, so that you can hear our discussion in real time. And I think you'll get a lot of value from this, especially if you want to geek out on anything related to photobiomodulation. I think Tom is really making big contributions to the overall field, to all of our knowledge collectively, with his line of experimentation. And he's also just a really awesome guy, great-hearted guy, very honest, very high integrity. And I hope you enjoy this podcast on red and near-infrared light therapy. Tom, welcome to the show.
Hey, fantastic to be on the show with you, Ari.
So I saw a presentation of yours recently. I saw a video of the presentation that you gave at the photobiomodulation conference that just happened in 2024 in London, just in September. Mm-hmm. And you did a presentation on something that I have been, what's the right word? I have been dying to get answers to for years and years at this point. Yeah. And that is penetration depth. I'm going to try to briefly describe this for listeners so they understand the problem with it, but or the issue that's at play here.
Yeah.
And basically, the very short version of the story for people listening is there is lots and lots of controversy around the subject of penetration depth when it comes to red light therapy, near infrared light therapy, this field of photobiomodulation. More broadly, photo is light, bio is biology, and modulation is what it sounds like. So we're modifying biology with light. That's what this term photobiomodulation means. Within this field, there's been an enormous amount of controversy for years around questions like lasers versus LEDs. What's better? Different wavelengths. Is 630 nanometers or 660 nanometers better, or is near infrared at 810 or 830 or 850 or 880 nanometers better? Right. What about 1060 or 64 nanometers, and how far does that penetrate? And does the beam need to be shaped like this? What happens if you use this device? What happens if it's, and this is a big one, contact versus non-contact? What happens if the light source is pressed up against your skin versus far away from your skin? There are lots and lots of issues here, and the challenge that I've had for many years now, and particularly as I'm trying to put together the version 2 of my book, is that the body of research that exists just doesn't have the answers that we need. It just doesn't, these experiments haven't been done in the way that we need to have clear answers to all of these questions. So we're kind of trying to piece together bits and pieces of evidence and speculate. And then when I saw your presentation on what you did, a presentation on testing in a very rigorously scientific way, the penetration depth of different kinds of light sources applied in different ways. And I went, I need to talk to this guy to basically get some clear answers to these questions, hopefully with some actual hard evidence to back things up. Because I've done plenty of at-home experiments, in my closet in a dark room where I can see certain things, but I don't have the sophisticated devices needed to actually measure all of these things. And you've now done those experimentations, hence why you are now here on this podcast and we're having this conversation. So hopefully that makes sense to everybody listening. And with that said, I know we're going to focus a lot on those experiments, but Tom, let me have you start by kind of taking people through
a bit of your background of how you got into this field, why you started the company that you started, Sun Power LED,
Yeah.
and just a bit of the backstory here.
Okay, so if you would have asked me 16 years ago if I shine light on your body, whether it have an effect, I would have told you you're crazy, you're smoking something, because I couldn't see that at all. I mean, sure, you go outside and you stay out too long and you get a burn, sunburn. I could understand that. So that's an effect of light. And yeah, I've got three kids and now 10 grandchildren. So I know that the incubator used with the blue light affects the belly rumen. So if you jaundiced kid, you have an effect. And light obviously grows trees and does all sorts of fantastic stuff. It's critical to our whole life. If we didn't have light, we'd be in trouble. But take it back about 18 years ago, I developed I'm in electronic development. So for 40 years now, I've developed electronic devices that are for all different purposes. And about 18 years ago, one of the salespeople, we're kind of the Silicon Valley North where I'm located. And anyways, we have salespeople of all kinds that were coming to me with different products and new technology. And they brought me these LEDs and they said, "Isn't this fantastic?" And it was the first high power LEDs. And they would put out quite a bit of light power, not like the little indicator that you have on your TV screen or whatever, but I mean, this was serious light power. And I thought, great, how much do they cost? They're $70 a piece. Okay, and how many would I need for a 100-watt light bulb? I need 3 of them. How many of these can you sell? So in other words, it'd be $200 just in the LEDs before you create your first 100-watt light bulb. Like what market would you have? Zero, right? And I'm thinking, what can I do with this powerful blue? And I'm going through all their brochures, and they showed that this could be used for dentistry. So blue light can be used to harden your filling. I don't know if you had that done where they pack the white filling material in, and they use the blue light as a catalyst to harden the filling. So no problem. I could, if I took one of those $70 LEDs, I could make a $2,000 device and sell it on the market, and that's what I did. So I got FDA approval, got the lights. Rolled that ahead 3 more years, and not a good idea to compete against 3M, by the way. They're no fun. They not good competition. They can make the product in China for $5 and millions of them, and you have to make it in North America. But I made these products, had them on with the dentist. They loved them, and so this high-powered blue LED would cure the filling. So I could totally understand that light could photoactivate a compound. You might know that they use UV light for Bondo for cars, fiberglass in cars. So that's done. So when it rolled ahead, my wife was ill with a bunch of problems, and we were trying to resolve some of those problems. And she didn't have cancer, but I ended up going to this one doctor. Now, the other part of it was, about 35 years ago, we live in Canada, and you used to use storm windows to put in the upper, all your house to insulate your house. Those are the old houses. And I went up a ladder, 2nd floor height, pushed the window in, and the ladder took off. And I fell right onto concrete. I didn't bust anything. So I have 2nd floor height down to concrete.
Whoa.
I didn't bust anything. But every year, 2 years, I could pick up a paper clip, and all of a sudden the muscle spasms that immediately would happen, and the pain that I would go through for several months, like 3, 4, 5 months. I do chiropractic. I do all the things you're supposed to do, but it always took me time, a lot of recovery time. So now I get this opportunity. I hear of this one doctor that lived or worked with his clinic about half an hour from me. And I heard how fantastic he was. And I thought, man, he's a medical doctor. He's got to be able to help my wife. So I go in to see him. And he's asking my wife a whole bunch of questions about her background. And he ended up helping her. Okay, this was the great part. But one of the questions he says is, is there any stress you can get rid of in your life? Well, she starts pointing at me because I've been self-employed, barely making it, getting sometimes good things happening and then the bottom falling out, all this kind of stuff in the business realm. So he immediately turns to me. He says, "What do you do?" And I said, "I make this powerful blue light for curing the white fillings." He says, "Can you make it in red?" And I'm like,
Oh, wow.
"Why red?
How long
What's
ago was this?
this is 16 years ago."
Okay.
So he said, "Why?" I said, "Why red?" And he says, "Well, red is the right wavelength to photoactivate a drug that kills cancer." And I thought, fantastic. You and I both have heard the motto, the cure is just around the corner. It'll never happen with the present medical probably going on there, because there's, anyways, that I better not go there. But regardless, I thought, fantastic. Now, I was very naive at that time. I believed that the medical system really would want to see cancer treatment go forward and new developments cure people and heal people and that. And so I said, yeah, and that day he's going to go buy 10 red laser pointers and put them together with elastic bands. And he had two patients, one with cancer on the throat, a guy with cancer on the throat, and a woman with cancer in her breast. And it was bad. Both of them weren't turning out well. And so he said, so I said, "Look, can you give me 3 weeks? I'll build you the first high power light, the red light." And I knew the wavelength that needed to be 635 nanometer. He told me that. He had done all the research. He bought the drug. The drug was expensive. And in 3 weeks, I built the first high power liquid cooled, water cooled LED system. I mean, this thing was about this big, and I was pumping there'd been probably about 30 watts optical out of this device, and it was about that big. And I delivered it in 3 weeks. The employees, everybody was on it. We delivered it and we shrunk, he started the treatment on the two patients, and 1 month we shrunk both cancers. And I thought, my gosh, this is a bad breast cancer and bad, situation on the guy's throat. And I thought, everybody's going to want this. And you know what? I tried everything to move this. We knocked on so many doors. I've been all over the US. I've been in different parts of Canada to try and present this and get it moved forward. That's a separate company. So we're going to move off the stage of PDT. But that was...
And for people listening, this is something that if you're interested in looking up the literature on, it's called photodynamic therapy.
Correct.
And there are various substances that are activated by wavelengths of light, oftentimes red light. Methylene blue is an example of this, is often used in photodynamic therapy, and several other compounds, including some natural compounds, have been used in this kind of. Sometimes it's used to target the killing of certain kinds of cells. Like
abnormal cells of different kinds can be dealt with. So what's cool about methylene blue? Did you see the reaction curve on methylene blue?
Reaction curve in terms of what parts of the spectrum
wavelength
activate it?
Needs to be, it looks like this, like right at
red light.
660. I got it on my slide deck, lower it down, but right in the middle of 660 is where you want to be. So the bright red is the right wavelength to photoactivate that. They've been doing that in Brazil are you familiar with in Brazil? Already, Brazil is really advanced in a lot of stuff with PBM and PDT. But they were using it for diabetic foot ulcers and bacterial infections and that. So really cool.
Well, when I caught on to it was very shortly after COVID started, and I became aware of some research showing that light-activated methylene blue neutralizes viruses, and that they were using it in blood transfusions at the start of the pandemic. To when they were taking blood out to basically cleanse the actual blood, sanitize it, I should say, of the COVID-19 virus, of SARS-CoV-2. And so methylene blue, basically activated with light, kills that virus. And given that I had a background in red light uh, and I had some methylene blue on hand. It was like, oh,
Oh,
I
both
wonder
of them.
if it can do it in a bag. And I know red light penetrates beneath the skin into the human body. What's to
Right
stop it
here.
from doing it in the human body too, other than, issues of depth of penetration?
660 nanometer right
There you
there
go.
will
There you
cover
go.
your whole body after a while.
Yes.
Circulation. That's
Yep.
the right wavelength. But
Yep.
yeah, and also there was Brazil was during COVID. There was a research done on shining light in the back of the throat. Did you see that
Yep.
but that was with indocyan green, which is there's like 20 photosensitive compounds out there that are reacted to different wavelengths. And that wavelength is 810 nanometer, and that shows great promise as well.
Hmm.
So yeah, that's really cool. So I moved, anyways, PDT is a separate company for me. I started, and hopefully someday we'll see it finally take off. But I don't hold my hopes up too high, and we can't treat anybody with it because it's not been approved, and and just to be
And
sure,
and
I'm
and
not a
just,
doctor. I want to say that I'm not a medical doctor.
okay. And just, you don't have to go in depth, but as far as the reason why you perceive this to not be taking off, do you see it as financial interests that are
Yes,
essentially suppressing the technology?
that is the best way to describe that. And
Okay.
if you help people to heal faster and they don't need the other treatments, it's not in the best financial interests of some people,
Right. And we won't go
unfortunately.
further into that for risk of maybe this podcast being censored or something like that.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
okay, so let's go
So
back
yeah,
into red and near infrared
yeah. So what
photobiomodulation.
happened? So what happened was I I didn't believe red light at that point would do anything on the body without a drug. Drug activated, no problem. Light only, forget it. You're smoking something. So, anyways, 2 months after I built this light, I had to do a little adjustment to it. Something needed to be fixed on it or whatever. I can't remember now. And I got it back and I made a little tweak so I could bring it back to him. And wouldn't that happen at that time? So every 2 years, 1 to 2 years, I'd have these extreme muscle spasms. And, at that very moment, I was dealing with one of these muscle spasms just when I got that other equipment back. So I thought, what the heck? Why not put the light in the back of my chair? I could barely get into my chair. The pain level that I was experiencing was probably about an 8 out of 10, where 8 was just screaming at me, but I had to keep working. So I had to work on my computer, CAD work or whatever I was doing at the time. So I put the light behind my back and it was, and then about 20 minutes later, I'm like, starting to move. I get up and I stand up and I'm like almost can bend over. And my pain had dropped from maybe an 8 down to a 3 in 20 minutes.
Wow.
That was my aha moment for red light therapy, photobiomodulation, cold level laser, whatever you want to call it. There's a whole pile of names, but that was my aha moment. My gosh, this can do this on my back. And all these years I've been going to the chiropractor, physio, all these things, and waiting it out for the 2, 3, 4 months, of pain. And 20 minutes I can get relief. So then I started building lights. Now at the time, LEDs were far too expensive. Like at that, like if I wanted to create a small light, it would have been just, nobody'd buy it. But I thought in my own situation, I wanted to build a light big enough to do my whole back. Because as you know, when you get a muscle spasm, sometimes all the muscles contribute to the factor. So you want to do everything, right? So I built halogen-based or halogen, however you want to pronounce it, light source. But if you take a 300-watt work light, okay, remember the 300-watt, and you've tried to put your hand in front of it, what would happen there? All right, you'd burn your hand in
Yeah.
seconds, right?
Yeah.
And I was trying to figure out a way to filter the far infrared because that's what's heating up the surface
Right.
of your skin.
Hmm.
And so I thought, how can I filter that? And there's a theory, there's actually a biblical theory that there was there's a layer of water and a layer of water. So the sunlight was actually shining through the upper layer of water. Okay.
Which is
So
true.
and I thought, hey, what if I put a layer of water in front of that light source? What would happen?
Very smart.
And so I don't think I had the idea. It got dropped in my brain somehow. Okay, I have no idea, but I got, all of a sudden I had this idea of putting this layer of water in between. I stole my wife's lasagna dishes, 2 glass lasagna dishes. Okay, and I committed them to the cause of research.
It's where all good scientific research starts, is lasagna dishes.
So I put the 2 lasagna dishes back to back, and I put a silicone seal around, glued the 2 together, and waited for the glue to dry, the silicone, and then filled the middle with water. So it was about 1/4 of an inch of water. And what I learned is, then I thought I'd try it, so I put water in there, and you put it, I had it half full, so you can imagine a pie plate, right? I had it half full. The water line was halfway up, and I put the one of those GU10 bulbs, the real focus jobs that used to be in the ceilings, and I put that, in front of, above the shining through the glass, no water, and it was burning hot. Dropped it below where it's shining through the water. So only difference was just the height. I was just moving it so the light beam had to go through the water, and no heat. Above the water line, heat, burning hot. Below the water line, no heat. What it was is all the far infrared is absorbed by the surface of the skin. So people don't understand that when they hear about far infrared saunas. Another big challenge out there in understanding is far infrared saunas just heat up the surface of the skin. They don't there's no direct penetration. Now, can it have effect deeper in the body? You're sweating out toxins, you're doing this good stuff, but there's 0 penetration for far infrared.
It's near 0.
It's
so I would agree with you, and I've spent a lot of time actually debunking this on podcasts because there is a widespread misconception, thanks to a lot of marketing efforts over, I think, 20 plus years now, to promote the idea that far infrared energy is actually penetrating very deeply into the body and quote unquote heating you from the inside out. So they actually paint a picture like traditional saunas, just you're in a hot room, it only heats up at the surface, but infrared energy penetrates deeply into your body, and there's a whole
you have to go to wavelengths that are shorter than 1350 nanometer. Anything so anywhere from 600 to 1350 nanometer wavelengths that penetrate. So what happens, so why my thing worked? Why did it take the heat away? Well, because it absorbed the far infrared before my water and my skin did.
Yeah.
So it's almost like having the perfect filter in front of the halogen bulb when you have that water in there, that it takes out anything that would be absorbed in your hand. So I had 15 years of seeing PBM help people. I saw a cop who drilled a guy in the face when he was resisting arrest, broke a bunch of bones in his hand, and his hand was all swollen up. It was his gun hand, right? And it was all swollen up. And they said he couldn't do anything because his bones were pointing in all directions. He used PBM for my Genesis, we call it the Genesis Health Light, but we had this light on his hand, of prototypes, ugly looking prototypes in the beginning, but we actually shrunk his hand in size. 2 weeks later, when he was supposed to get surgeries, to review the surgery, they said they didn't need to do surgery because all the bones in his hand all lined up perfectly.
Yeah.
No surgery was required. He continued to do that, and he had record healing and he was able to use his gun hand in incredible shortness of time. So that's what PBM can do.
Tom, I know you have a number of other stories like that you showed in your presentation that you gave at the event. Do you want to briefly show people that, or do you want to?
Sure. We can do that. I can share a screen here. And
okay, let's just be mindful of the time, so that we have time to get into the penetration experiments as well.
All right. So here we go.
Some of the other stuff.
Okay, I think this will work. There we go. Okay. So just so that everybody can see that I'm totally crazy, okay, I just got to do something here. This is one of my light devices, and you can see the light penetration. So much for millimeters. It's going, I have a light probe that's going in my mouth, and it's hitting the roof of my mouth, and it's lighting up, it's going right through my palate, my upper palate, going through my sinuses. And if one zooms right in, they can actually see the light coming through my eyes, and also you can see the optic nerve with that light. And we
And
now,
that's inches at this point. That's what, 3 to 4 inches?
I would say at least two. I mean, it's I put it in the center of my so at least two, it's 2 inches that you're looking at here. This is, by the way, 660 nanometers, so it's not doing a favor for the as far as penetration depth.
Right.
But, okay. Do you have anything blocked?
Meaning near infrared 810, 830, 850
Right, exactly.
would
Where we
penetrate
could.
even more, but you wouldn't be able to see it without night vision goggles.
Right. So, and on the right, we've now started the Mile High, I screwed up on the spelling, Mile High PBM Club, where we're treating people on the plane. They now have the 120-volt outlets, and because our units can run directly off the 120, there's no problem, and they don't have lithium batteries, so nothing to burn up on the aircraft. But anyways, we ended up treating a number of people on the plane. This is just quick. This is a kid, that 19-year-old guy that swung a pickaxe around through some dirt, and unfortunately the dirt was much softer than he thought. Swung around, cut his tendon right through. They put the tendon together, and in another day or two it fell apart. So they had to do 2 surgeries. So lots of trauma, and you can see in 2 weeks the inflammation has come way down. Well, you can't see the inflammation pictures, but it was really, really big swollen thing. And in 2 weeks, you see post-treatment. 3 weeks, you see that. And now he was told he wouldn't be able to walk for 6 to 9 months. This is what PBM can do. This is 3 weeks. You can see how much he can move his foot. And you can see he doesn't have the range of motion of up and down, but it's starting to work.
Yeah.
There you go.
And on the other slide, you can see him walking at 4 months. Now his gait is not perfect, but
4 weeks.
hey,
4 weeks.
4 weeks. Yes, correct. 4 weeks. This is a diabetic foot ulcer. Sorry about those that are a little squeamish. This person was supposed to lose their leg in 1 week's time. The surgery was scheduled. And the person, I mean, this foot is in really bad shape,
Yeah.
and gangrenous and ready to, that's why they amputate. But they rushed one of my smaller lights down to the palm light down to the hospital, used it undercover for 20 minutes a day, and within 1 week they canceled the surgery. 2 months later, it was healed down to that. And in another 2 months, it was totally healed, and she was able to walk with her foot intact. This is a woman that strokes. So how does it affect the body with strokes? Well, not only did she use the helmet, but also that we've developed, but also she used the large panels that we've made. We call that the canopy. Anyways, I'll just play just a minute of this because we've got to be very careful on time here.
Hi, Yolanda.
Hi,
So, you had a stroke
I did 2 months ago.
2 months ago, and what's happened since then?
I had the stroke, and the right side of my face had pins and needles all the time, and I lost function in the left side of my body. So I can stand and barely walk.
Mm-hmm.
My arm, I can feel touch, but I don't have any control over the movements. So that's where I am today.
Right. And coming in here today, we did a treatment with the helmet to see how that would work, and just a nice warmth feeling.
It is a nice warm feeling.
Right. And then you did the light therapy treatment under the canopy, and
So before, my husband had to position me because I can't move, and the left side is in a lot of pain. My arm, I can barely move it most times without a massage first and therapeutic oils and painkillers. So I started the treatment off my husband put me like this, lying on my stomach, because it's very painful in the shoulder and the arm, and then my lower back as well. We did, how long was it?
10 minutes.
10 minutes, and then he was changing to the other light treatment, and at that point I was able to have my husband move my arm straight down, so he got it to go straight down without any pain, and no pain in the shoulder, and then I did the other light treatment.
Mm-hmm.
How long?
Okay, I'm going to stop it there because, sorry, I'll just mention with that woman, so she could not pull her arm down and this was for, I think it was 4 months of treatment. She's been trying to get that arm to come down, and in one treatment with PBM, she was able to straighten out her arm without pain. That's the thing.
Wow.
She walked in with pain, and the pain was gone. And she was able to straighten out her hands and fingers, and anybody can look at the videos later on. This is my granddaughter, just the big thing here. She pulled boiling water towards her for mixing Jello, and it poured down her leg, the boiling water, and she had 2nd and 3rd degree burns. And you can see day 6, she's already, all the skin has been scabbed over, and by day 8, the scabs fell off. In about a few weeks' time, there you could see that where the discoloration was, and then 2 years later there was no visible scars. This is when I plowed my head into concrete. I fell forward, face on my face, accidentally. I was on my phone trying to see where I was going to find a building, and I didn't see the little thing that was there that I fell onto the concrete. Face forward without stopping myself. I busted out my tooth, and 4 days later, I really bounced my face off the sidewalk, and you can see 4 days later I'm doing much better. Some doctors looked at this and they commented how I didn't have severe bruising. I should have had severe bruising all over my face even 4 days later, and I didn't. This is part of our light technology as far as
Hold on, Tom.
Yep.
Before we go here, let me just add something to this. So, just so people listening know and watching know that this is not only these case reports and anecdotes. It's great for people to see this because this is impressive. But I also, and for, I would say, for most of us, seeing visuals of like bad injuries and gangrenous feet and injuries like the kid with the pickaxe, it impacts us a lot to see that, as opposed to looking at scientific research where we're just seeing text and numbers and things like that and charts. But from a scientific perspective, I want people to also know all of this is supported by a huge body of scientific literature in various kinds of injuries, showing that red and near infrared absolutely speeds up the rate of healing of everything from diabetic foot ulcers to ankle injuries in athletes and bone fractures and all kinds of different
Yes.
Injuries. We have a very large body of evidence to show that it does actually greatly speed it up. And roughly, painting with broad brush strokes here, something like a roughly doubling of the speed of healing compared to if you didn't
Correct.
use photobiomodulation,
Or
as
even
a
more.
generalization.
Yeah, and if people want to go to the sunpowerled.com website and hit the button under research, they can scroll down to research database, and we've got the fellow from the Netherlands, I forgot his name right now, but we got 7,500 research articles that on PBM that you can search through to find a lot of different things that have been studied on.
Vladimir I forget Vlad's last name, but Heiskanen or something like that. Something very
great.
Scandinavian.
Man, what a fantastic work he did to pull all those studies and the amount of detail. And the only challenge I'd say with that PBM database is it includes, just to take it a little bit with a grain of salt, because it does take in all types of light devices, which means that some of those light devices are kind of inferior for what you're trying to accomplish.
Right.
You need to have the right amount of power behind it. I
Yes.
usually compare it to If you go, in San Diego or some of those places where you got the big hills or mountain, and you were trying to go up that mountain with a four-cylinder pickup truck fully loaded with, the pickup bed, you probably won't get to the top, or it'll take you a very, very long time to get there. If you had an 8-cylinder or 12-cylinder pickup truck, you would fly up that hill with fully loaded, and we really are working on the 12-cylinder, 8 and 12-cylinder end of the power spectrum.
Tom, let me ask you this. Just as a, from a big picture perspective,
Yes.
how would you summarize the core benefits, let's say the top 5 or top 8 or however many you want to list off, of photobiomodulation? And you could just list off sort of,
Oh, sure.
here are the core benefits I've seen as being most impressive in the people I've worked with.
Okay, so the core benefits is that you can use this light in conjunction with standard medical. You don't have to, and really outside of some antibiotics that are reactive to the blue light spectrum, which we're not working in, you don't have to worry about adverse effects with using the red light. So very safe. Another thing with PBM is it generally is quite safe. People can go to my website. There's a thing there called, or I'll think of it in a minute, but there's a location that you can go to see the 100 million plus treatments that have gone on with PBM all over the US, and no written up bad reports on PBM. So
what do you see as the key benefits? So you showed a lot of slides on injury
so
healing.
the key benefits is that
injury healing being a big one. What are some of the others?
Oh, all right. So injury healing, and so that's speeding up the healing, increasing blood flow to the area, increasing the lymphatic drainage. Lymphatic drainage. So that can be anywhere on the body, which lymphatic drainage is really, really key. People are learning about it, that helps get your toxins out of the area. So if you have sprains and all those kinds of things, that's what it does. Let's see, light technology. If you have enough light, you can penetrate deeper. So it's a non-invasive way of, as opposed to surgery, to get at things to help it. When it comes to autoimmune disorders, you can help the type of gland or whatever to start working in the right direction. That includes thyroids. So you can help the hypothyroid start working better towards the normal state. You can get a hyperthyroid going the other way. So as you said, in photobiomodulation, modulating, and so it's actually modulating the effects of the cell or the mechanisms. Sometimes it's upregulating the mechanisms, and sometimes it's downregulating the mechanisms. But the body knows what to do with that, and be able to heal. When we're talking internal injuries, you can reduce, you can speed up the healing. You can reduce the inflammation. You can start getting that body to work better. And a lot of times, let's say knee pain, if you're able to shrink the Baker cysts, or you're able to reduce other swelling inside the knee, all of a sudden you can start walking better. If you start walking better, you get more exercise. You start getting more exercise, you start losing weight. Guess what? You're a whole lot better by using light therapy. And you can use it, and I've been telling people you can use it even 3 times a day if you wanted to in certain situations. It's not harmful. And I'm trying to think, there's so many other,
There's many, and obviously I've written a book on the subject that compiles 20 plus
Yeah.
benefits, and I just wanted to hear from you as far as what you perceive as some of the things that are really the most noticeable.
Well, the things about being able to do things in the brain that drugs don't seem to be able to help. When we're talking jet lag, when we're talking migraines, you're talking all these, seizures. to be able to help the body to be well enough that it can deal with whatever the trigger mechanism is, and not have to do it. I mean, one guy, he had grand mal seizures, and he got PBM treatment by Dr. Praveen Irani, and I understand I understand he's a fantastic guy to know. I've worked with him for a long time, and I guess you're going to have him on the show coming up. That's going to be great.
I'm interviewing him next week. That's right.
Okay, he's fantastic, knowledgeable guy, a professor at University of Buffalo, and he had treated somebody with seizures with the light. This is 2 years prior to COVID, and so he did it over a course of 2 months, and he was seizure free for 2 years, and he wasn't doing ongoing treatment, but 2 years he was free. And then during COVID, he ended up having the seizures again. Now, with all the lockdowns we had up here and in Buffalo and New York and everything, there was no way he could get the treatment. So he got one of my lights, and now he's 2.5 years seizure free. So when you can influence the brain from strokes, the other pain things people don't think of is like old injuries. I mean, you carry around that pain all the time. And when you're able to, sometimes it happens that somebody will, it's crazy. They just do one treatment on the area. And I think it's something to do with adhesions on the, nerves, but all of a sudden they don't have that pain after one treatment. And that's it for pain on that old injury. Makes no, I know there's probably others that can give you all the mechanisms. I can't. You want me to build something for the next space launch? I could, but when it comes to knowing some of the biology, that's not an area that I'm strong in. But I've been.
I want to tell you that I really appreciate that perspective, because I happen to have spoken to a lot of people in this space, and oftentimes it's owners of companies who actually have a lot of wacky ideas about the mechanisms of how this work. They can be very detached from the actual body of scientific literature on this topic, where there's so much research that has been done on the mechanisms, and yet somebody will sort of be very attached to this one particular theory that really isn't very well supported of how it works. So anyway, I was going to ask you about the mechanisms, but since you said what you just said, I won't. And in the interest of time,
I guess for those who are just going through this podcast for the first time, I'll just say what happens is the mitochondria in the cell can absorb certain wavelengths, just like a tree can, and it's like pouring high octane fuel, that's my best description, into the cell. And now the cell can go nuts and fix all sorts of things. It gets the immune system involved. It ungums the cells. It does a whole host of different, releases nitric oxide, which increases vasodilation. And there's a whole host of things that if somebody is a nerd and wants to know the biology of why does it work, they can do that. But I would say, 90% of people don't know why they turn on the switch on their wall and it works. The light comes on. They don't understand the mechanism. I do, but who cares? Most of them just switch the switch and turn it on and it works. That's kind of like PBM. It's so beautiful that it can be used so safely anywhere on the body, including new stuff that we've learned about the eyes as well.
Well, that's a wonderful little 1 minute summary of a lot of the research on mechanisms. That's sort of, here's what you need to know. And broadly speaking, what you said is true. So I think that's great. So let's go to some of these experiments on penetration depth, because, and I get the sense here we're probably going to have to do a part 2. Because
I talked too much.
we could probably do like 2 or 3 more hours of discussion. But let's see what we can get to on these experiments, and let's see how many questions of mine that we can sort of get answers to.
Okay, I'll use this first slide here very quickly. What happens is that LEDs versus lasers, and I'll show something else with lasers, but this is still LEDs versus LEDs, is that if I just pick the bottom slide there, and you see the area where there's a single LED, you'll get a certain amount of penetration with that because it'll phase out. It'll because there's a lot of diffusion in the treatment surface as soon as you start getting into the skin. And you have the same thing occurring again at every time where the LED is reached, or if you have the LEDs right against the skin, the same thing happens. But what happens is that you don't end up with a very deep penetration with this. Where you get more penetration is when you're able to create a very even amount of light over the whole treatment surface area, and you have a lot of optical power behind it, and you have overlap so that there's a super even illumination. And what that does is once the light goes into the skin, even light from the outside edges will diffuse and scatter through the tissues and add to the center zone of you're trying to treat. So that's something there. I'll just show you lasers and LEDs. So on the left, you'll see an LED, and on the right, you see a laser pointer. And what I did is I toned down, I really reduced the power level of the LED on the left side. So it was the exact same power of 3 milliwatts on both things. And if you see on the bottom on the left-hand corner, you'll see my finger when I'm about an inch away from the surface, that my whole bottom of my finger is illuminated. Whereas on the right-hand side, you see the laser is a culminated light, which then shoots directly at one little spot. And yeah, you can shoot across the room and it's still a spot. Okay, so the culminated light from a laser, or you have the diffused light from an LED, which diffused at a certain rate depending on the cone size and all sorts of technical stuff. But on the top, what happens just going through your fingertip? When you compare the power level of an LED and the power level of a laser, and you're looking at it, there was a dot on the back side. What do you see, Ari, on the right-hand side? You see a fingernail fully illuminated, right? There's no dot there.
Yeah.
And on the left side, you see the finger fully illuminated the same way. So when you actually do some comparisons, you see, wow, it almost looks like the same amount of light power coming through, whether it's a laser or LED. But I did that.
Let me just briefly explain to people listening. So laser versus LED, and it was kind of visible on the last slide, but the basic idea in general, this can differ depending on how devices are made, but in general, laser is what's called a collimated beam of light. It's a laser beam. So as Tom described it there, if you shoot, if you have a laser pointer in a classroom or something, you can shoot that light across the room and it can travel a long distance and still be a beam. So there'll still be a spot on the wall. And that's because it's a very narrow beam, as opposed to LEDs, which generally spread the light out sort of immediately as it exits the light source, rather than a single beam in a specific direction. It's sort of diffusing the light, more like what you would have in the room lighting in your home.
Correct. And the thing that people don't understand is they still have this thinking that, my gosh, they've seen enough James Bond movies that, cut a person in half and all that kind of stuff. If you put that laser on the backside of your finger, and you could be a foot away, but there's that spot. But immediately when it goes through the first eighth of an inch, quarter of an inch, it's bouncing in all directions, that light. It's no longer a culminated beam. It's now going all over the place. As you go through thicker and thicker tissue, you start noticing that there's no difference between the two, and that'll get into in a minute.
Right.
So here's just a quick picture showing you different wavelengths. I'm sorry, I'm going to bounce around a little bit. We'll get through these real quickly. On the left, you see 660 nanometer. On the right, you see 810. What you do see with the 810 beam is it's actually going through my gum. This was with a special camera, but you can see the light. Can you see that, Ari, on the right? I hope it comes
on kind of
through.
The inside back of the mouth behind the molars.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Whereas on the right side, you barely see it. So 810 penetrates much better. You're looking at, depending on the type of tissue you're going through, anywhere from 5 to 8 times, 10 times more.
Is it that much more?
Pardon?
Is it that much more?
Yeah, it's incredibly more.
Wow.
It is a lot. I can,
That's news to me. I didn't realize it was that big of a difference.
yeah, I'm going to skip this slide because I'll just say with this slide, concussions, this kid, amazingly, he racked his head onto concrete. And one treatment, he was able to go from being in a dark room to being able to, the next day to being able to read a book. So,
Wow.
amazing things on light on the brain. Okay.
So
Yeah.
let's fast forward to some of the penetration experiments, just
Okay.
in the interest
All
of
right.
time.
Yeah.
So
So
and
I've got a lot of things there. We'll go forward. I'll just say too,
and
like
let me clarify quickly for listeners, Tom. So there's sort of three big areas of controversy here. One is the laser versus LED issue,
right.
and this is hotly contested among lots of people. There are clinicians who have been using laser for a long time who will swear that laser is different and unique in the effects,
Yep.
and much superior than LED. And there are other people who say there's no difference, and there's a body of literature that has tested this, though the tests are often not perfect, because it's hard to compare sort of a spot treatment in a very specific area, which versus LED, which often covers a much larger area. So some of these experiments are not perfect, but that's one area that's contested. Another area is sort of distinctions between different wavelengths of light and how much the penetration differences, how differently they penetrate into different tissues. And the biggest one I would say that is really emerging that I'm most interested in is contact versus non-contact therapy.
Yes.
So where you are applying the device directly to the surface of the skin versus where it's several inches or maybe a foot or two away from the skin, and how that affects penetration depth of the light differently, and what are the implications of that.
Exactly. So, and what's key here is we're not using cheap light meters. Light meters have their place where you measure the light in a room, but they're not calibrated. They like to different wavelengths. And so it's really key. We got the right equipment. So I've got some really expensive.
And just to add to that, that's the problem with a lot of the testing that's been done by a lot of different people and a lot of companies out there, is they are using lower quality equipment that is just not adequate to tell us everything we need to know.
So with one of the devices I have, you plug into the laptop. It's a pretty expensive small little box that allows you to look at all the different wavelengths, and you can calibrate things to be highly accurate. So you can measure exactly what the power level coming off your device is. So this is an example of me plotting a dual wavelength device. In this case, it's a 590 nanometer coupled with an 810, which I don't usually do, but in this case, it was a special device actually for the eye in this case. So yeah, so this was a presentation that we did, and this is on the lasers versus LEDs and tissue penetration. So here's one device that looks like it landed from Mars. What was that recent movie that that was out there?
I don't know, but that device to me looks like R2-D2 from Star Wars.
Yeah, no, but the one guy who was involved in the atomic thing. Come on. Oh, I can't remember.
I don't know.
It'll come back to me. Anyways, they labeled this ball when I brought it in. This is a very special device. It looks like it's kind of like an exercise ball that has some ports in it, and it's a very expensive exercise ball. This thing's about 10 grand just for this ball. What happens is there's an opening in the top, and you can, I closed down the opening on the very top to an area where it was only 2 inches in diameter. And what we were looking for is to see how much light could go through tissue. And this is the only way to measure it accurately. So I had sensors inside the device, and those sensors allowed me to do very accurate measurements of what light goes into this ball. The big thing about this ball is anything that comes through that 2-inch opening will be measured, regardless if it's a laser or an LED. It'll be a very accurate measurement. So it doesn't matter the beam thread. What it does is light goes in this inside, and it's kind of like a white coating on the inside that just bounces the light everywhere. So you get a sampling as soon as you put a sensor in there, and once you calibrate it up, you can measure any wavelength that and any power that you want in and shining through the opening that you have. So what we did here is we wanted to compare an LED cluster comparing to a laser. So we just put through different tissue. So as I mentioned, I did this work at Dr. Praveen's lab at the University of Buffalo, and he's got over 25 years of PBM research. So here's an example of us shining. So on the top of that ball, this is only the top. On the left-hand side, you see the laser. The laser. The left-hand side, you see my SunPower LED device that's shining through just right on top of the surface in this case, because we did the first measurements, just what's going in and getting a calibration on it. And then in the middle, you're seeing a laser being used, 810 nanometer laser being used on layer of chicken, and another picture that I have an arc laser there that is 1064 nanometer, and it's shining through pork. We decided to use chicken, pork, and steak. There we go. We decided to use those three because we could get it from the supermarket, and after all our testing, we could eat it. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, so here's what you're going to see here is we're comparing basically a 5-watt laser with a 5-watt LED cluster of 5 watts. Now there's a little anomaly in the front end of the very first reading, and unfortunately we didn't have the time to go back and double check it. But the rest of it, look at how close this is. So if you look at the graph, at 3/4 of an inch thick of, in this case, chicken, there was, you can see that there's a drop of light output. It's easiest to follow the blue line, which is the LED. The orange should have been the same, should have been there up there. The laser should have been up at the 10 watt, right there on the blue. But as you see, 3/4 of an inch, you see they're almost matched. When you go to 1.5 inches, it's again almost the same. And when you go down to 2.25 inches, there seemed to be a little bit of a benefit to laser at this point. But hey, I'm just showing the real data. That's what we did with the chicken. And one thing about it was that, I mean, then if that's what's going through all that tissue, and I wished we could have had live tissue on this, okay? Get a chicken to lay down on the side and go through the chicken while it's live, because you're missing out on the blood flow and all the other things that interfere with the light readings.
Well, there's another big one that I think your experiments will not control for, but and I don't know to what extent you're aware of this, but that is the skin itself and melanin in the skin.
Yeah, so there's what's called the Fitzpatrick meter that you can get, and that measures the color of the skin. And we just did 21 people that, they're not patients. I don't know why I used that term, not patients. 21 people who are willing to work with us, and we're shining the light of 660 or 810 or 1050, and also 635 nanometer, but through the cheek, and doing a measurement inside the cheek to see how much light was getting through the cheek.
Wonderful.
And definitely there was the melanin in the skin has some impact. In our case, we probably saw about a 20% reduction. We only had 2 very, very dark people that there were 5 on the Fitzpatrick scale.
But even apart from the melanin in the skin color, the skin itself, as in contrast to a piece of meat, without skin covering it, will have
so there's a
big
lot of loss.
difference as well.
There's a lot of loss in skin for sure. Yeah. But hey, this is just like once you get past the skin, how much is going to get through?
Exactly.
Yeah. So what we did is we also did it with pork, and you can see here that in this case, so we did the laser and 660 nanometer, the laser versus the LED, a 10 nanometer and the 1050. And you see in the 660 and 810, we actually were getting, it seemed like, there was slightly better illumination, like energy coming through 2.25 of an inches of tissue, in this case with the pork. We did this, and I've got all this on my website, so you can people can look it up. Our study when we were at the PBM. If you go on the research tab, scroll down to PBM 2024, you can see where I was and the research, like other stuff that we encountered over there. And we also did it with steak. Steak has got much higher absorption, but it was really cool for the most part that things followed. We had a couple little things that were giving us a little issue, but for the most part, it came out pretty good. So I'm just gonna I'm gonna hold it there. Why don't we go back
Tom,
to
Tom, we gotta cut off right now because unfortunately I have a call that I can't miss in 3 minutes. But
all right, okay.
let's do another one because this is important and we need to cover it.
Yeah, I want to show you the light through the hand and how we can measure it.
Tom,
All
thank
right.
you so much. I'm excited to continue the conversation.
All right, okay, bye for now.
All right, bye.